My name's Ethan. Ethan Caldwell. I'm the younger brother, the one who always lived in the shadow of perfection. My older brother, Nathan. Growing up in a small town just outside Denver, it didn't take long for me to figure out the rules of our family. Nathan got everything. He was the golden boy, tall, broad-shouldered, with a smile that could charm anyone. Straight A's, captain of the football team, the kind of guy who'd have colleges begging for him before he even hit senior year. Me? I was the scrawny kid who stuttered through book reports, the one who'd rather sketch in the back of class than chase a ball. Dad called Nathan the future. Mom called me sensitive. I called it unfair. But I didn't hate Nathan, not really. Sure, I envied him. Who wouldn't? He got the bigger room, the new car on his 16th birthday, the endless praise at family dinners. I got hand-me-downs and backhanded compliments. Still, he was my brother. He tossed me a grin every now and then, sneaked me a beer when our parents weren't looking. We had our moments. Until Lily came into the picture. Lily, my Lily, was the one thing Nathan didn't get. Or so I thought. I met her at a dive bar 3 years ago. I was 27, working a dead-end job at an auto shop, still trying to figure out what the hell to do with my life. She walked in like a storm, long legs and ripped jeans, dark hair spilling over her shoulders, green eyes that could cut glass. She didn't belong in a place like that, surrounded by guys who smelled like motor oil and regret. But she sat at the bar, ordered a whiskey neat, and caught me staring. "You gonna buy me another, or just keep gawking?" she said, her voice low, teasing. I didn't have the cash, but I threw my last $10 on the counter anyway. 2 hours later, we were tangled in the backseat of my beat-up Chevy, her nails digging into my back, her breath hot against my neck. It wasn't love at first sight. It was raw, messy, electric. But it was mine. Lily was different from anyone I'd ever known. She didn't care about my lack of ambition, my insecurities, the way I flinched whenever Nathan's name came up. She saw me, or at least I thought she did. We moved in together 6 months later, renting a cramped apartment downtown. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I proposed a year after that, with a cheap ring I saved up for months to buy. She said yes, her lips curling into that wicked little smile I couldn't get enough of. For the first time in my life, I felt like I'd won. Nathan had the world, but I had her. And then everything started to crumble. It was subtle at first. Nathan came back to town after a stint in Chicago, some big-shot finance job he landed right out of college. He rolled into our family's Sunday dinner in a tailored suit, a Rolex glinting on his wrist, talking about mergers and bonuses like he was born for it. Everyone hung on his every word, Dad nodding like a proud king, Mom beaming, even our cousins asking for stock tips. I sat there, picking at my plate, feeling smaller with every laugh he got. Lily was there too, sitting next to me, her hand on my knee under the table. But I caught her glancing at him more than once. Those green eyes lingered a little too long, her lips parting just slightly when he spoke. I told myself I was imagining things. Nathan had always had that effect on people. It didn't mean anything, but it kept happening. Over the next few weeks, Nathan started showing up more, dropping by our place unannounced, inviting himself to dinner, suggesting drinks with just the three of us. He'd flash that perfect smile at Lily, compliment her cooking, her laugh, the way she wore her hair. "You've got to keep her here, Ethan," he'd say, clapping me on the shoulder like I was a kid who'd won a participation trophy. I'd force a grin, but inside I was boiling. Lily would laugh at his jokes, toss her hair, lean in a little too close when pouring him another glass of wine. I watched every move, every glance, like a hawk waiting for a snake to strike. Then came the night that broke me open. It was a Friday. Nathan had invited us to some upscale bar downtown, his treat. I didn't want to go, but Lily insisted. "Come on, Ethan, it'll be fun. Your brother wants to celebrate with us," she said, slipping into a tight red dress that hugged her curves like sin. I couldn't say no, not when she looked at me like that, her eyes promising me the night wouldn't end at the bar. So we went. The place was packed, dim lights, jazz in the background, people in suits sipping overpriced cocktails. Nathan was in his element, charming the bartender, ordering us drinks I couldn't pronounce. Lily glowed under the attention, laughing louder than usual, her hand brushing Nathan's arm when he made some quip about my grease monkey hands. I sat there, nursing a beer, feeling like a third wheel in my own damn relationship. Then I had to use the restroom. I was gone maybe 5 minutes, long enough to splash water on my face and tell myself to stop being paranoid. When I came back, they weren't at the table. I scanned the room, my heart starting to thud harder than the bass in the music. Then I saw them, out on the balcony overlooking the city skyline. They were standing too close, Nathan's hand on the small of her back, her head tilted up toward him, her lips parted like she was hanging on his every word. The city lights reflected in her eyes, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just a casual chat. There was something electric between them, something I'd felt with her once, but now saw slipping through my fingers. I stood frozen in the doorway, half hidden by a curtain, watching like some pathetic voyeur as my own brother leaned closer, his voice too low for me to hear, her laugh soft and intimate in a way that used to be mine. I didn't storm out there. I didn't scream or throw a punch, not yet. Something in me snapped, but it wasn't loud or reckless. It was cold, sharp, like a blade being drawn from its sheath. I turned back to the bar, ordered another beer, and waited. They came back 10 minutes later, Lily's cheeks flushed, Nathan's grin wider than ever. "There you are, bro," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Thought you got lost." Lily slid into the seat beside me, her hand brushing my thigh, but it felt rehearsed, like she was trying too hard to prove something. "You okay, babe?" she asked, her voice sweet, but her eyes darting away from mine. I nodded, forced a smile, and took a long swig of my beer. "Yeah," I said. "Just fine." But I wasn't fine. I was burning inside, every nerve screaming that I'd just seen the beginning of the end. The next few days, I couldn't shake it. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. How Lily would check her phone late at night, hiding the screen when I walked into the room. How she'd hum to herself after getting a text, a little too pleased for it to be nothing. How she'd mention Nathan in passing, casually dropping his name into conversations like it didn't mean anything. "Oh, Nathan said there's a new Italian place downtown we should try." Or, "Nathan thinks I'd look good in blue. Maybe I'll get a dress like that." Each time, I'd grit my teeth and nod, but it was like acid dripping into my veins. I had to know for sure. I couldn't just sit there, letting my paranoia eat me alive. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I started spying on her. It felt dirty, wrong, but what choice did I have? I borrowed a buddy's car so she wouldn't recognize mine and followed her one evening when she said she was meeting a friend for drinks. She didn't go to any bar I knew. She drove straight to Nathan's place, a sleek condo in Lodo he'd bragged about buying last year. I parked across the street, my hands sweating on the steering wheel, and watched as she walked up to his door. He opened it before she even knocked, pulling her inside with a grin that made my stomach lurch. I sat there for hours, staring at the lit-up windows of his condo, imagining the worst. Her legs wrapped around him, her whispers in his ear, the way she'd moan his name instead of mine. Every thought was a dagger, twisting deeper. I didn't leave until the lights went out at 2 a.m., and even then, I didn't see her come out. I drove home in a haze, my knuckles white, my mind racing with what I'd do if I saw her walk through our door the next morning. She didn't come home until noon. When she did, she looked like she'd barely slept, her hair messy, her makeup smudged, wearing the same clothes from the night before, but with Nathan's jacket draped over her shoulders. "Rough night," she mumbled, avoiding my eyes as she kicked off her heels. "Drank too much with Sarah. Crashed at her place." Sarah. The same lie she'd used a dozen times before. I didn't call her out. Not yet. I just watched her shuffle to the bathroom, the jacket slipping to the floor like a taunt. That's when I broke into her phone. She'd left it on the counter while she showered, and I knew her password, my birthday, the one thing that made me think she still cared. I scrolled through her messages, my heart pounding so loud I thought she'd hear it through the walls. There it was, a thread with Nathan's name, dozens of texts stretching back months. "Missed you last night," he'd written just a week ago. "Can't wait to see you again," followed by a winking emoji. Her replies were worse. "Counting the hours, babe," and "Ethan's working late tomorrow. Come over." I felt sick, but I kept reading, each word carving deeper into me. Then I saw the pictures. Photos she'd sent him, her in lingerie I'd never seen, her posing in our bed, her lips parted in that wicked smirk I used to love. Nathan's replies were filthier than I could stomach. "You're killing me, baby. Can't wait to rip that off you." I dropped the phone like it burned me, my vision blurring with rage and something else, something primal, hungry, twisted. I didn't just want to confront them. I wanted to destroy them. Both of them. But I wasn't ready, not yet. I needed more. I needed to see it with my own eyes, not just guesses or texts. So I planned. I told Lily I had a late shift at the shop the next night, a lie she didn't question. Instead, I parked outside Nathan's condo again, this time with a cheap camera I'd bought off a coworker. I waited, my breath fogging up the windows, until I saw her car pull in. She stepped out, wearing a tight skirt and heels, her hips swaying like she knew someone was watching. Nathan met her at the door, his hands on her waist before it even closed behind them. I snapped pictures through the window blurry, but enough. Her pressed against him, his mouth on her neck, her head tipped back like she was in ecstasy. I didn't stop until the blinds came down, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the camera. I sat there for another hour, staring at the dark windows, my mind a storm of rage and lust and betrayal. Lust, because even now, even knowing what she was doing, I couldn't stop wanting her. That was the worst part. She tore me apart, and I still ached for her. When I got home, I poured myself a whiskey and spread the photos out on the table like evidence in a murder trial. Each one was a nail in the coffin of our life together, but also in Nathan's. He'd always had everything, everything but her. And now he'd taken that too. I wasn't going to let him keep it. I wasn't going to let either of them walk away clean. I heard the door unlock around midnight. Lily slipped in, her heels in her hand, thinking I was asleep. She froze when she saw me sitting in the dark, the bottle half empty in front of me. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing up?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, her swollen lips, her mussed hair, the faint mark on her neck that wasn't from me. Then I smiled, slow and cold. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "Thinking about family." She didn't know what I meant, not yet. But she would. Soon. Lily stood there in the doorway, her heels dangling from one hand, her eyes wide with something I couldn't quite place, fear, guilt, maybe both. The faint glow from the streetlights outside cast shadows across her face, accentuating the curve of her lips, the mark on her neck where Nathan's mouth had been. I hated how beautiful she looked, even now, even after everything. I hated how my body still reacted to her, my pulse quickening as she shifted her weight, her skirt riding up just enough to remind me of what I'd seen in those photos. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to pin her against the wall and demand answers. But I didn't. I just sat there, the whiskey bottle between us like a silent witness, and let the silence stretch. "Ethan, you're freaking me out," she finally said, her voice trembling as she dropped her heels by the door. She took a step closer, then stopped, like she could sense the storm brewing inside me. "What's going on? Why are you looking at me like that?" I leaned back in my chair, swirling the amber liquid in my glass, my eyes locked on hers. "Just thinking," I said, my voice low, steady, despite the chaos in my chest. "About how things change. How people change." I paused, letting the words sink in, watching her flinch ever so slightly. "How you used to tell me everything, Lily. Now I feel like I don't even know you." Her breath hitched, but she recovered quickly, forcing a laugh that sounded more nervous than amused. "What are you talking about? I haven't changed. I'm still me." She moved toward me, her hips swaying in that way that always drove me crazy, and slid onto the couch beside me. Her hand rested on my thigh, her fingers brushing too close to the edge of my restraint. "You've just had a long day, babe. Come to bed." For a second, I almost gave in. Her scent, jasmine, and something darker, something that wasn't mine, wrapped around me like a noose. Her touch was warm, familiar, and God help me, I wanted to forget it all, to drag her to the bedroom and claim her back from him. But then I saw Nathan's jacket on the floor by the door, and the rage roared back to life. I grabbed her wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but enough to make her freeze. "Don't," I said, my voice a growl. "Don't play me like I'm some idiot who'll just roll over." She pulled back, her eyes narrowing, a flicker of defiance breaking through the panic. "What the hell? Ethan? What's your problem?" But I saw the way her gaze darted to her phone on the counter, like she was worried I'd touched it. Like she knew I knew. I let go of her wrist and stood up, pacing the small living room, my hands clenched into fists. The photos were still spread out on the table, but I'd flipped them over before she walked in. I wasn't ready to show my hand, not yet. "My problem," I said, turning to face her, "is that I'm starting to wonder who you're really with when you're not here. Who's putting that smile on your face, Lily? 'Cause it sure as hell ain't me anymore." Her face went pale, her lips parting like she wanted to argue but didn't know where to start. "That's ridiculous," she said finally, her voice too high, too brittle. "I've been nowhere but with Sarah. You know that." She stood up, crossing her arms, trying to look indignant, but her hands were trembling. "You're paranoid, Ethan. You always have been." "Sarah," I repeated, letting the name hang in the air like a challenge. "Funny. 'Cause Sarah's been posting pictures from Vegas all week. You want to try that again?" I stepped closer, towering over her now, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Or should I just call Nathan and ask where you've been?" Her whole body went rigid, her eyes flashing with something raw, fear, maybe, or anger. "Don't you dare drag your brother into this," she snapped, but her voice cracked at the edges, giving her away. "He's got nothing to do with us." Us. The word hit me like a slap. Was there even an us anymore? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made her flinch. "You're right," I said, stepping back, my hands raised in mock surrender. "My mistake. Guess I'll just go to bed, then, since I'm so paranoid." I turned toward the bedroom, leaving her standing there, shaken, her lies hanging heavy in the air. But I didn't sleep that night. I lay there in the dark, listening to her uneven breathing as she slipped into bed beside me an hour later, pretending everything was fine. She didn't touch me, didn't dare, and I was glad for it. Because if she had, I don't know if I'd have kissed her or choked her. The next morning, I decided to push harder. I wasn't just going to watch anymore. I was going to make them feel me, make them squirm. I started with Nathan. I knew he'd be at the gym at 6, same as every morning, showing off his perfect physique to anyone who'd look. I showed up at 7, just as he was finishing his set, sweat dripping down his temples, a smug grin on his face as he caught me walking in. "Little brother," he called out, waving me over like we were best buds. Didn't know you even knew what a gym looked like. The guys around him chuckled, and I forced a smile, my jaw tight. Yeah, well, figure it's time to step up my game, I said, my voice casual, but my eyes locked on his. Gotta keep what's mine in shape, right? I let the words linger, watching his grin falter just a fraction. He didn't say anything at first, just wiped his face with a towel and nodded. Smart move, he said finally, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, uncertainty. Maybe. Good. I wanted him on edge. I spent the next hour lifting weights I had no business touching, just so I could keep him in my peripherals. Every time he glanced my way, I made sure he saw me watching, my expression hard, unreadable. When he left, I followed him, not to his condo this time, but to his office downtown. I'd overheard him mentioning a big meeting with some investors that day, and I figured it was the perfect chance to mess with him a little more. I parked a block away, pulled out my burner phone, and sent an anonymous text to his work number. I'd gotten it from Lily's phone. I know what you're doing with her, the message read. Better watch your back. I hit send and watched from across the street as he stepped out of his car, frowning at his phone, his shoulders tensing. He looked around, like he could feel me, but didn't see anything. Then he hurried inside, his stride less confident than before. With Nathan rattled, I turned my attention to Lily. I got home before she did, knowing she'd be back from work soon, probably after another meeting with him. I set the stage carefully, left one of the photos face up on the kitchen counter, the one where Nathan's hand was on her thigh, her head thrown back in a laugh. I crumpled it slightly, like I'd been staring at it too long, and left a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside it for effect. Then I waited, sitting in the dark again, the silence heavy around me. She walked in around 8, her hair loose, her blouse undone just enough to show the lace of her bra underneath. She froze when she saw me, her eyes darting to the photo on the counter. Ethan, she started, her voice barely a whisper. What is that? I didn't move, didn't even blink. You tell me, I said, my voice cold, cutting. You're the one in it. She took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth, but I saw the gears turning in her head, searching for an excuse. That's not what it looks like, she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. It's just a picture from that night at the bar. We were all there, you know that. You're blowing this out of proportion. I stood up slowly, my shadow stretching across the floor as I stepped toward her. Am I? I asked, my voice low, dangerous. 'Cause I've got more where that came from, Lily. I've got texts. I've got timestamps. I've got hours of you lying to my face. I picked up the photo, holding it between us like a weapon. So tell me, am I really blowing this out of proportion? Or are you just pissed I'm finally catching on? Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't sure if they were real or just another act. Ethan, please, she whispered, reaching for me. But I stepped back, out of her grasp. I love you. I swear, nothing's going on. He's your brother. He's been helping me plan something for you, a surprise. That's all. A surprise. It was so absurd I almost laughed. Instead, I leaned in close, my breath hot against her ear. You're good, I murmured. Real good. But I'm better. I turned and walked to the bedroom, slamming the door behind me, leaving her standing there with her lies and her tears. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. I'd planted the seed, and now I was going to watch it grow. I'd make Nathan sweat, make Lily beg, and when the time came, I'd burn it all down, everything they thought they had. Because if I couldn't have her, neither could he. I didn't sleep after slamming the bedroom door. I couldn't. My skin felt too tight, my mind too loud, replaying every moment of that night, Lily's trembling voice, the crumpled photo on the counter, the way her lies tasted in the air. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, hearing her shuffle around in the living room for hours before she finally slipped into bed beside me. She didn't dare touch me, just curled up on her side of the mattress, her breath uneven like she was fighting tears. I didn't care. I wanted her to hurt, to feel even a fraction of the betrayal that was eating me alive. But beneath the rage, there was something else, something I didn't want to admit. I still wanted her. Even now, knowing what she'd done, knowing she'd been with Nathan, I could feel the heat of her body next to mine, the faint scent of her jasmine perfume pulling at me like a drug. It made me sick. How could I still crave her when she'd torn me apart? I clenched my fist under the sheets, forcing myself to stay still, to not reach for her. Because if I did, I'd either kiss her or kill her, and I wasn't sure which was worse. Morning came too soon. Lily was up before me, moving around the apartment like a ghost, avoiding my gaze as she made coffee. The photo was gone from the counter, tucked away somewhere, probably hoping I'd forget it. I didn't mention it. I didn't mention anything. I just watched her, my silence heavier than any words I could have thrown at her. She felt it. I could tell by the way her hand shook as she poured the coffee, spilling some on the counter. Gotta go to work, she mumbled, grabbing her bag, her eyes darting to the door like she couldn't wait to escape. Sure, I said, my voice flat. Say hi to Nathan for me. She froze mid-step, her shoulders tensing, but she didn't turn around. just muttered something about being late and bolted out the door. I waited until her car peeled out of the lot before I grabbed my burner phone and checked the messages I'd cloned from hers overnight. There it was, a new text to Nathan, sent just minutes ago. He knows something. I'm freaking out. We need to talk. His reply came almost instantly. Don't worry, babe. I'll handle him. Meet me tonight. Usual spot. The usual spot. I knew exactly where that was, Nathan's condo, where I'd watched them through the window, their bodies pressed together like I didn't exist. My grip tightened on the phone, the screen cracking slightly under the pressure. Handle me? I'd love to see him try. But I wasn't going to just storm in, not yet. I needed them to think they were still in control, to let their guard down. So I waited, planned, and let the day crawl by, each hour sharpening my resolve like a blade. That evening, I told Lily I'd be working late, another lie she didn't question. She nodded, her eyes avoiding mine, and I knew she was already planning her escape to Nathan's. I left the apartment before her, drove to a spot a block from his condo, and waited in the shadows of an alley, my camera tucked under my jacket. Around 9, her car pulled up, and she stepped out, dressed in a black dress that clung to her like a second skin, her heels clicking on the pavement with every step. She looked like temptation itself, and I hated how my body reacted even now, my breath catching, my hands itching to grab her, to tear that dress off and remind her who she belonged to. Nathan opened the door before she even knocked, pulling her inside with a grin that made my blood boil. I crept closer, sticking to the shadows, and positioned myself beneath the window I knew faced their bedroom. The blinds were cracked just enough for me to see Lily's silhouette against the warm light, Nathan's hands on her waist, peeling that dress off her like he'd done it 100 times before. I snapped photos, each click a silent scream, documenting every moment of their betrayal. Her head tipped back as he kissed her neck, her fingers digging into his shoulders, her moans faint but unmistakable through the glass. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. It was torture, but it was fuel. I stayed until they moved out of sight, my hands shaking so bad I could barely hold the camera. Then I slipped back to my car, my mind racing with what I'd do next. I couldn't just confront them, not like this. It had to be bigger, sharper, something that had cut them both where it hurt most. So I drove to a print shop on the edge of town, one that stayed open late for desperate students and last-minute projects. I printed the best shots, grainy, but clear enough to see their faces, their bodies, the hunger in their movements. I stuffed them into an unmarked envelope and wrote Nathan's office address on the front in block letters, no return address. I dropped it in a mailbox outside his building, knowing he'd find it tomorrow, knowing it'd rattle him to his core. The next morning, I watched Lily like a hawk again. She was jittery, barely touching her breakfast, her phone buzzing every few minutes with messages she didn't dare open in front of me. I played dumb, sipping my coffee, asking about her day like nothing was wrong. Busy one? I said, my tone casual. She nodded too quickly, muttering something about a deadline. I smiled, slow and deliberate. Hope Nathan's not working you too hard behind the scenes, I said, watching her flinch. She didn't respond, just grabbed her keys and left, her movements stiff with panic. I didn't follow her this time. Instead, I went after Nathan. I knew he'd gotten the envelope by now. His secretary would have handed it to him first thing. I parked outside his office building, blending into the crowd of suits and briefcases, and waited. Around noon, he came out, his face pale, his usual swagger gone. He kept glancing over his shoulder, like he expected me to jump out of nowhere. I followed him to a nearby cafe, staying far enough back that he wouldn't spot me. He sat at a corner table, ordered a drink he didn't touch, and pulled out his phone, typing furiously. I checked the cloned app on my burner. Sure enough, he was texting Lily. Someone knows. Got pics at work. We gotta stop this now. Her reply came fast. I told you he's acting weird. What if it's him? What do we do? Nathan's response was colder than I'd expected. If it's him, I'll deal with it. He's got nothing on me. Just stay calm. Deal with it. There it was again. I smirked, leaning back in my rental car, the photos burning a hole in my jacket pocket. He had no idea what he was up against. That night, I pushed Lily further. I waited until she got home, late again, her lipstick smudged, her blouse wrinkled in a way that screamed Nathan. I didn't say anything at first, just poured myself a whiskey and sat on the couch, the envelope of photos hidden under a magazine beside me. She tried to act normal, chatting about her day, but her voice was too high, her laugh too forced. Finally, I cut her off mid-sentence, my voice low and deliberate. You ever think about loyalty, Lily? I asked, my eyes boring into hers. What it means to keep a promise. She froze, her coffee mug halfway to her lips. What are you talking about? She stammered, but I saw the panic flare in her eyes, the way her hands tightened around the mug. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, my voice dropping to a whisper. I'm talking about us. About vows. About what happens when someone breaks them. I slid the magazine aside, revealing the corner of the envelope, just enough for her to see it wasn't empty. Her gaze snapped to it, her breath catching. You want to tell me something, sweetheart? Or should I open this up and see what's inside? She lunged for the envelope, but I was faster, snatching it out of her reach and standing up, towering over her. Ethan, please, she begged, her voice breaking, tears spilling down her cheeks. It's not what you think, I swear. I can explain. Explain. I laughed, the sound harsh, unhinged. You think words are gonna fix this? You think I don't know where you've been, who you've been with? I stepped closer, backing her against the wall, the envelope crumpled in my fist. I've seen it, Lily. I've seen you with him. Don't fucking lie to me. She sobbed, her hands reaching for me, but I grabbed her wrists, pinning them to the wall, my face inches from hers. Her breath was hot, ragged, her eyes wild with fear and something else, something that made my blood boil and my body ache at the same time. Ethan, I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice trembling. It didn't mean anything. I swear, I love you. I got caught up. Caught up. The words hit me like a slap, but they didn't douse the fire in me, they fed it. I pressed myself closer, my lips brushing her ear, my voice a growl. You love me. I murmured. Prove it. And then I kissed her, hard, possessive, pouring every ounce of rage and want into it. She gasped against my mouth, her body arching into mine, and for a moment, I thought I'd won her back. But then I tasted him on her, Nathan's cologne, his arrogance, and I pulled back, shoving her away, my chest heaving. Get out, I said, my voice shaking with barely controlled fury. Get out before I do something we'll both regret. She stared at me, tears streaming down her face, then grabbed her bag and ran, the door slamming behind her. I stood there, panting, the envelope still in my hand, knowing I'd just crossed a line I couldn't uncross. But I wasn't done. Not with her. Not with Nathan. They'd both pay him for taking what was mine, or for giving it away. And I'd make sure they felt every second of it. The door slammed behind Lily, the echo ringing in my ears louder than my own heartbeat. I stood there, panting, the crumpled envelope still clutched in my hand, whiskey burning in my throat. Her taste lingered on my lips, jasmine and betrayal, and it drove me mad, the way I still wanted her even after everything. But that kiss, that moment where I'd felt her melt against me, wasn't surrender. It was a taunt, a reminder of what I'd lost, not just to Nathan, but to her willingness to throw it all away. I threw the glass against the wall, watching it shatter into 1,000 jagged pieces, mirroring the mess inside me. I didn't chase her. Not right away. I needed to think, to sharpen the jagged edges of my anger into something I could use. She'd run to Nathan, I knew that much. Her tears, her pleas, they were just a performance, a way to buy time until she could crawl back to him. But I wasn't going to let them have their happy little ending. I'd burn it all down first. Everything they thought they had, everything they thought I was too weak to destroy. I spent the next hour pacing the apartment, the photos spread out on the coffee table like a war map. Each image was a wound, Lily's arched back, Nathan's hands on her, their laughter through the window like a knife in my gut. I poured another drink, my hands steadier now, the plan forming in my mind like a storm gathering strength. I wasn't going to just confront them. That was too clean, too easy. I wanted them to feel trapped, to choke on their own lies until they broke. And then I'd walk away, not as the loser, not as the shadow, but as the one who'd finally won. First, I went after Nathan, harder this time. I knew he'd be at his condo, probably waiting for Lily to show up with her sob story about how I'd lost it. I grabbed a few of the photos, the worst ones, and drove to his place, parking just out of sight. I waited until I saw Lily's car pull up, watched her stumble up the steps in that same black dress, her face streaked with mascara as Nathan opened the door and pulled her into a hug. The sight made my stomach churn, not from pain anymore, but from a cold, calculated fury. They thought they were safe, untouchable. They were wrong. I slipped out of the car, a baseball cap pulled low over my face, and stuck to the shadows as I crept toward his building. I'd scoped the place out enough times to know there was a back entrance, a service door that never locked properly. I slid inside, the dim hallway smelling of bleach and stale air, and made my way to the stairwell. Nathan's condo was on the 3rd floor, and I could hear their voices through the walls as I got closer, Lily's high and frantic, Nathan's low and soothing, like he was talking her off a ledge. I didn't knock. I used the duplicate key I'd swiped from Lily's purse weeks ago. She hadn't even noticed it was missing, and let myself in silently, the door clicking shut behind me. They didn't hear me at first, too wrapped up in their argument in the living room. I stood in the hallway, listening, my hands clenched around the photos and a small knife I'd brought, not to use, not really, but to make a point if I needed to. You don't understand, Nathan, Lily was saying, her voice breaking. He's got pictures, he knows. He practically threw me out tonight. What if he does something? Nathan's laugh was sharp, dismissive. Ethan? Come on, babe, he's all talk. Always has been. He doesn't have the guts to do anything. He'll get over it. Give him a few days to cool off. Oh, I wouldn't bet on that, I said, stepping into the room, my voice low and steady. They both froze, their heads snapping toward me like deer caught in headlights. Lily's face went white, her hands flying to her mouth. Nathan's jaw tightened, but he didn't move, just stood there with his arms crossed, trying to look like he wasn't rattled. Ethan, what the hell? Nathan started, but I cut him off, tossing the photos onto the coffee table between them. They scattered across the glass surface. Lily's bare skin, Nathan's hands, their tangled bodies frozen in grainy detail. Lily let out a choked sob, sinking onto the couch, her hands shaking as she stared at the evidence of her betrayal. Thought you might want to see these, I said, my voice calm but laced with venom. Since you're so sure I don't have the guts. I stepped closer, my eyes locked on Nathan's, watching the color drain from his face. You've always had everything, haven't you? The grades, the girls, the glory. But her, I pointed at Lily, who flinched like I'd slapped her. She was mine. And you couldn't stand it, could you? Couldn't stand that I had something you didn't. Nathan squared his shoulders, trying to play the alpha, but I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. You're unhinged, man, he said, his voice steady, but his eyes darting to the knife in my hand. This isn't about me, it's about you. You've always been jealous, always whining about what you don't have. She came to me because you couldn't give her what she needed. The words hit like a punch, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I laughed, a cold, hollow sound that made Lily whimper. Maybe, I said, stepping closer until I was right in his space, the knife still at my side but close enough to make him tense. But you're wrong about one thing. I'm not whining anymore. I'm done playing second fiddle. Ethan, please, Lily whispered, her voice shaking, tears streaming down her face. Don't do this. I'm sorry, I swear, I'll end it. I'll come back to you. Just, don't hurt him. I turned to her, my gaze cutting through her like a blade. Hurt him? I said, my voice dripping with mock surprise. You think I'm here to hurt him? I leaned down, my face inches from hers, her breath hot against my lips. I don't need to hurt him, Lily. I just need him to know he's not untouchable. I straightened up, turning back to Nathan, who was still trying to look tough but failing miserably. And I need you to know what it feels like to lose. I didn't stab him. I didn't even swing. I just stood there, letting the threat hang in the air, watching them squirm under the weight of it. Then I turned to the table, picked up the photos, and tore them into pieces, letting the scraps fall to the floor like confetti. You're not worth it, I said, my voice steady now, the rage cooling into something sharper, more dangerous. Either of you. I walked out, leaving them there, Lily sobbing, Nathan silent, the air thick with fear and regret. But I wasn't done. Not really. I drove to a bar on the outskirts of town, one where nobody knew me, and drank until the edges of my vision blurred. I thought about burning Nathan's condo down, about slashing Lily's tires, about mailing those photos to every person he worked with. But none of it felt big enough, raw enough. Then it hit me. What would hurt them most wasn't violence. It was walking away, letting them live with the wreckage they'd made, knowing they destroyed something they could never fix. So I did the one thing I hadn't planned. I disappeared. I drained half our joint account, packed a bag, and left town that night. No note, no goodbye, just a burner phone tossed in a dumpster and Lily's ring sitting on the counter where she'd find it. I heard through the grapevine a month later that Nathan dumped her not long after. Guess the thrill wasn't worth the trouble once I was out of the picture. Lily tried to find me, showed up at the shop, called my old number 100 times, but I was long gone, working odd jobs in a nowhere town halfway across the country. I didn't go back. Didn't need to. They'd burned me down, but I'd risen from the ashes, sharper, colder, free. Some nights, I still dream of her, those green eyes, that wicked smirk, the way she felt under me. But then I wake up, and I remember the truth. She wasn't mine to keep. Neither of them was. And for the first time in my life, I'm okay with that.